Well, the heat worldwide is also proving to be a problem for the animal kingdom as well. Even camels, of course known as the ships of the desert for their resilience in the hottest and driest places on Earth, well, they're falling victim to the climate crisis as well. North Africa and the Horn of Africa are home to around 80% of the world's largest population of camels with one hump. But rising temperatures, as well as fueling diseases and death. And herders are reporting camels with blisters on their hooves, skinned, burned by the hot sand, and they're also facing stress, fatigue and dehydration. Of course, camels play a vital role in the livelihoods and food security of many communities. Well, it's not just camels being impacted by those changing temperatures. I spoke to Nikhil Advani, Senior Director of Wildlife, Climate and Resistance at the World Wildlife Fund, about the global effects.
Yeah, over the last few years, we've been seeing more and more of these extreme heat events. We're actually potentially entering what we're calling a super El Nino phase right now. And during these El Ninos, parts of the world experience extreme heat events. So it's been well documented over the last 2-3 decades even. And from each of these events, we're learning more and more about extreme heat. We're seeing certain parts of the world crossing thresholds that they've never crossed before. And it's impacting species and people and habitats all over the world.
So just tell us more about that and the impact that you're seeing on different kinds of animals and what you're particularly concerned about.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the impacts everywhere. I think animals in habitats that are already very hot, think about places like sub-Saharan Africa, the Sahel, the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia. Here, when you get extreme heat events, you're crossing physiological limits for species in these places. We think of recently in South America, actually, there's been cases of howler monkeys falling out of trees and dying because of extreme heat and dehydration. A few years ago in Australia, we saw the same thing with flying foxes falling out of trees and dying. And in many parts of Africa, we're seeing species exposed to extreme heat and alongside that, lack of rainfall. So those combined conditions create excessive drought, and we're seeing animals dying from starvation because there's not enough food and water. So this is in these very hot parts of the planet. But at the poles, where you have cold adapted species, we're seeing massive impacts of this as well. You're seeing melting sea ice. And as a result of that, you have species like polar bears that don't have enough habitat to hunt on. So they're having to swim a lot more. In Antarctica, you have emperor penguins that raise their chicks on the sea ice. And as that ice is melting, we've actually had entire colonies of penguins that have been lost, at least the chicks have been lost in a single breeding season because of that disappearing sea ice. And then there's, of course, the oceans and corals.
I mean, all of this is very distressing to hear. What is needed to prevent this? What can be done?
The single biggest thing is obviously to reduce our emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. If we're to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, that has to reduce drastically. But even if our emissions went to zero overnight, we're still committed to decades, if not centuries, of warming. So we have to have measures in place to cope with the impacts we're already seeing. Here at WWF, actually, we have this fund called the Wildlife Adaptation Innovation Fund. And we've funded a number of projects all over the world to help mitigate the impacts of climate change on species, including the impacts of extreme heat. So we've implemented a number of projects for corals, sea turtles, birds, all species that are being impacted by extreme heat. And we've implemented some pretty cool solutions to help them deal with those events.
Aside from the question of limiting CO2, I just wonder, for anybody watching at home, for all of us who are concerned about wildlife, is there anything that we perhaps can do locally or in our green spaces or gardens, if we have them, to help animals in these very, very warm times? Yeah,
great question. Animals are very smart. They also have what we call behavioral plasticity, where during extreme heat, they will seek out shelter. They will seek out sources of water. They might be more active at nighttime rather than during the day. And if you have backyard space that accommodates it, you might be able to lend a helping hand. Providing shade is always a good thing. And we're not just thinking about big animals here, right? Even small things like insects and birds. Providing water is great. And if you're willing, we're now seeing instances across the US where bears are entering people's compounds and taking a dip in the swimming pool as a way to cool off. So I'm not sure if you'd actually want that. But there is actually quite a lot that you can do to provide good habitat and shelter for species throughout the year, but especially during extreme events like extreme heat.